as well as for the health and integrity of ecosystems. In this context, this webinar on science and technology for a sustainable future has been organized to enlighten various issues and possible solutions. Professor Gopal Shankar Singh, Institute of Environment and Sustainable Development, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, Dr. Tejal Kanitkar, Associate Professor, School of Natural Sciences and Engineering, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru, and S. Venkat Mohan, Senior Principal Scientist and Co-Chair, Energy and Environmental Engineering, CSR Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, Hyderabad, have joined us as guest speakers and panelists of the webinar. Students and teachers of Kendriya Vidyalayas and Navodaya Vidyalayas, including other schools, are also prominently participating in this program under Jigyasa and Vigyan Jyoti schemes of Government of India. Now, may I request Dr. Rakesh Kumar, our Director CSI NERI, to deliver welcome address, please. सर आप म्यूट पे हैं.
Good morning to all participants and all our guests, speakers who have joined, Professor Singh, Dr. Tejal, Dr. Venkat Mohan, and all these distinguished panel. They are going to be speaking to all our students and many others who are interested in science and science-related things. A special thanks in current times, because even online it's not easy to take out time and do it, because many times we see our diaries are more busy than what it used to be earlier, because we have many meetings and lectures that we are giving online. So thank you, a special thanks to all the speakers who have agreed to be part of CSR NERI's program today. There were a few thoughts that I considered speaking to you in the beginning, that when we look at science, typically science has been defined in our country and many other countries, but now there is a movement to probably redefine or probably re-understand. So typical understanding of science has been that you should be talking about physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology. These were the four domains. And when you look at something which has happened in the world, uh, because of these three, four, some very good things have happened and some very bad things have happened. So what is actually missing right now, and which people have realized, that science which is connected to understanding, which could be social science, political science, geoscience, they are also actually part of science. And I bring in that domain of understanding, because we have seen that many good technologies in our country or many other countries have not gone ahead, only because people didn't understand the social aspect of the technology. So if I can make a good system of flyovers, I can make good system of railways. But if we have not taught our own people how to use it, how to be responsible, how to be connected to the science which is powerful to solve real life problem, we will not be actually doing good service. So in terms of observation, we call it power of observation, power of logic, power of experiment, power of doing something which is different, power of also working with different kind of people. Uh, if you remember, many of those who are from this background, that it was always considered great that if you have a single authored paper, and of course there were those people were given a lot of importance, but the times have changed. Now we are talking about, can we have multiple author papers coming from different background, from different areas, and creating something which is very unique. So how will that happen? Only when we bring in science of different types and people try to understand each other. So we have divided science quite a bit. In chemistry, you will see there will be physical chemistry, organic chemistry, analytical chemistry. There is something called bioanalytical chemistry. There is also instrumentation chemistry. For the purpose of getting deeper into a subject, this looks okay. But when we want to solve a real life problem, I think it's important that we understand that physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and social sciences are actually interconnected. And that's where only when we connect this, the sustainability and sustainable future, the agenda that we have kept today, will be achieved. And before I end, I just wanted to give you an example of how science and engineering, if it is joined with society, chances are that we'll be able to do better. So there is a domain of safety and environment. Many of you are aware of it. And there are many factories and industries. We have a EHS manager, and those managers are supposed to take care of anything which goes wrong about environment, health, and safety. Now imagine environment is a different subject. Health is basically kind of a doctor related subject, and safety is behavioral issue. Currently, we have considered behavioral issue as the lowest domain of safety, and when things go wrong, we react. And some places we have a very distinct domain of how the safety is to be maintained. But a big science which is going on right now is to understand behavior of safety. So if I know certain person is behaving in a particular way, I'm sure that some kind of accident can happen. Is the same thing is about environment. If I know that society is behaving in a particular way and probably is not even aware that it's going wrong, we call it sometime blind spot because we see it every day. We don't actually feel it. So if I see the society is behaving in a particular way, the damage to the environment can happen in a very distinct and very fast way. And we must have seen it that people have planted certain kind of trees where they should not have, because those trees are not the right trees in those areas because groundwater table is depleting very fast. We are growing sugar cane in those areas where we have water scarcity. We are exporting that material which is very water intensive to other countries, but we are importing something which is creating more problems for us in terms of water and water related pollutants. So when we look at all of these things together, chances are we will be able to first become aware and then try to solve this problem. So I'm again very thankful to all of you having joined. Special thanks to all the faculty members who are going to speak to all the students here who have joined from various Kendriya Vidyalaya and other schools, and many of the teachers who have joined. So welcome again on this Science Day, which is being held 2 days earlier. We are also celebrating on Science Day on 28th February, which we will again send invites. Thank you very much. So Prakash Kumari.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you for highlighting the importance of this multidisciplinary approach, in particular science and engineering, how they can be connected for the betterment of society. Thank you, sir. Now our first guest speaker is Professor Gopal Shankar Singh, Institute of Environment and Sustainable Development, Banaras Hindu University. It is an honor for me to introduce him. Professor Gopal Shankar Singh did MSc Botany from Banaras Hindu University and obtained PhD in Environmental Science from Jawaharlal Nehru University with specialization in ecology, environment and sustainable development. His current research interest includes ecosystem analysis, restoration, conservation ecology, natural resource management, biodiversity conservation, sustainable development, linking ecological components with socio-economic components, traditional ecological knowledge, ethnobotany, climate change, sustainable agriculture, land use and land cover analysis. Currently, he is professor at the Institute of Environment and Sustainable Development, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. May I request Professor G.S. Singh to address the listeners, please? No.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
A very good morning to all of you. I'm highly thankful to Honorable Director of NERI, Dr. Rakesh Kumarji, for kind consideration for me to be part of National Science Day. I am also thankful to Tejal as a speaker and the Venkat Mohan as a speaker. So I'll be listening to them. I have prepared a couple of slides talking the view of the students' point of view. And my slide is visible. Prakash?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, then fine. So this slide is very simple to just looking the mind of the students, you see there are four major components where one can find the life. These are being known as the atmosphere, ecosphere, hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. And all together, all these living components make a life sphere where one can find the life all together interacting with. Now, this is the simple way of interacting in the nature. Basically, from living to the non-living component which interact in the nature, and that's where a system function begins with. This slightly elaborated one slide indicate about how energy movement takes place on the landscape level, from where a biotic component and the abiotic component, particularly living and the non-living, being interact with and move from one system to another system. And this indicate about a kind of trophic level which perfectly function in a well-managed natural ecosystem, to like energy movement takes place in from either in the chain or in the wave form. If any chain is going to break, then there will be a lot of problem in the system. Now, this relationship of this well-balanced chain or ecosystem is one can find very well just hardly 30-40 years before. But because of some imbalances that has been taken place in the nature, this functional form, what it is being known as the basically succession, homeostasis, carrying capacity, ecological footprint.
सर आप म्यूट पे चले गए।
That's fine.
हाँ, अभी आ रहा है सर। आप स्लाइड शेयरिंग शुरू कर दीजिए। यस।
So basically, a system is very well function. These are the terms ecosystem. But what happened in due course of time, because of the some imbalances in the population, the natural resource pattern, because population is increased and natural resource demand to fulfill the population has increased. So in this way, many activities which involve at the ecosystem level to clear the land, agriculture activity, forestry activity, fisheries, and so on and so forth, industrialization development, urbanization process, all these activities were either knowingly or not unknowingly, if it is the intended result that it improve the quality of life, but it is the unintended result that has been ended to environmental crisis, number of environmental problems that has begins with. Now, all these environmental problems one can see here in terms of air pollution, entire air mass has been polluted. Then one can find the biodiversity component, loss of the biodiversity in the extension part. Being at the biodiversity background, I will discuss a couple of more to the biodiversity. Then in terms of water pollution, the water problem, a number of water problem to the surface water to groundwater. Then solid waste management, another problem. Then overall, altogether a kind of food supply problem related to the different levels. So one can find a major problem, environmental problem to leading to. Now, in a couple of slides will indicate about a problem which lead to the agriculture because of the heavy use of the chemical fertilizer, pesticides, which has been used very extensively, and therefore that has gone to the ended to the pollution level. Now, some of the pollution related to the climate change, atmospheric pollution, increasing different greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is responsible to change in the climate pattern, and which is resulting in a various form. I will show a very simple slide of the Himalayan study, which we have been involved in the Himalayan study in the last. So basically, changing in the greenhouse gases is resulted into the climate change. Another major environmental problem, environmental issues which lead to the melting of the glaciers, rising of the sea level, movement of the wild and the species and all those. Most challenging is environmental issues is basically related to the loss of the biodiversity. The 6 mass extinction has been begun with in terms of the loss of the biodiversity. Biodiversity loss is very fast, particularly in the tropical region, and this is the 6 months. And a number of data is being presented in terms of loss of the species, but very simple way of understanding is we are losing the 3 to 5 species hourly per. So imagine in 1 hour we are losing 2 to 5 species, even 3 to 5 species. One can multiply with the 24 hours in a month and a year and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is the loss of the extension of the biomass is very fast, and particularly where we are using in a variety of ways, particularly in direct ways, indirect use. Indirect use, I have mentioned here, one can see fuel, timber, paper, ornamental, medicines, so on and so forth. Indirect use, we have a many use in terms of indirectly which are being used. Looking one of the example for saying that in terms of medicines, almost as per the WHO report, more than 70% population of the world is using these medicinal plants for their primary treatment. Now, whatever the particularly biodiversity that which we have now, we are looking in terms of ecosystem services. It provides a number of services, provisioning services to regulatory services to supportive services. And one of the calculation which has been done by the Costanja and et al. Group, looking the 16 biomass benefits, that benefit is 16 to 54 trillion US dollar per year, that kind of benefit one can find. Now, whatever the biodiversity that which we have, particularly in terms of number, it is unexpected number is many more, even 100 millions. We are expecting that we have 100 millions of species, but hardly we are known to 1.4 million in terms of its use and all these values. And you see the loss of biodiversity is very fast, and we are hardly knowing 1.4 million, and yet we have to know aware about the 100 millions of species. And looking the loss, we have to be very careful in terms of how we have to preserve and protect all these. Now, this in terms of loss is concerned, you see, if total number of plants one can find, hardly we are more useful to 3,000 species. Out of them, hardly 200 species we have been domesticated, and whatever that we have, 16 species almost we are using in a very massive way in all over the world. So this is the kind of utility is very minimum. Still we have to know many of the species. Apart from that, environmental problem has gone to many conflict level, which one can find conflict at the different kind of national park, biosphere reserve, even man-to-man conflict. One can find conflict of natural world, one can say. Now, what has happened basically, a kind of boundary which earlier it was a boundary within the limit of the boundary, all these were limit of the boundary, but that boundary we have crossed, and boundary once we have crossed, then we have now increased to a many-fold of environmental problem which I have come across with. To protect these biodiversity, we have a number of now different kind of acts and different kind of basically how we are going to protect our environment and the biodiversity altogether, having a variety of acts from fisheries to Indian forest, mining, mineral related, then wildlife protection, water related, forest conservation related, air prevention and the control. So we have a number of acts to protect and preserve our biodiversity. This very simple slide indicating to the student that how we have to conserve, basically in situ and the ex situ, either in the nature conservation one is some problem. Either
You please.
okay,
आप
okay.
You continue, sir.
Okay, fine. So basically, we have to do conservation in the nature-based, in the nature itself, maybe in the biosphere reserve itself, maybe in the national park itself, in the wetland, in the particularly in the on-site conservation. Is in situ, ex situ is either we have to bring the species in the botanical garden, in the zoological garden, in the aquarium, in the different kind of culture procedures, tissue culture procedure and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of conservation. And of course, basically we have to have many challenges in terms of from the different angles, but looking at challenges, we have to follow all the eco-technological based approach, basically to nature-based solution. We have to look for agriculture management based on the traditional knowledge base, forest management based on the traditional knowledge based management, medicinal plants conservation. So all these conservation now it should be the eco-technology, basically the ecosystem based technology, nature based technology based involved into the local people. And more so we have to start a number of plantation, different kind of plantation of importance of important tree species which are very useful to the people, and we are already doing in terms of various perspective to protecting the even the broader area of knowing in terms of sacred forest, sacred groups, sacred landscape, which are very prominent in different part and different region of the India and the world that need to be conserved and the protect. Then a very simple way of more action-based form is we have to begin with the bottom up approach of following the conservation procedures, management of the forest resources, looking the keystone species which are most important species in the forest, looking the umbrella species which are very important in the any national park. Now looking to conservation point of view, United Nations has given a 17 main goals how we are going to cover to a broader nature and nature based to entire infrastructure, industry, to climate, all these how we are going to protect in 17 development goals which has been given. So basically what I'm trying to mention is this 17 goals in the India which is being taken care of by the Niti Aayog. In all the development aspect, we have to look for the sustainable development options, basically emphasizing upon the social component, ecological component, and the economic component, so that this entire goals and the entire sustainable development then will be dealt with. One more option is in terms of research institution, the research organization is we have to look for the transdisciplinary research approach, a multi-scientific based research and approach in terms of looking the to finding the solutions. Now this is slide simply indicate we have to deal all together development in the social sustainability level, economic sustainability level, then ecological sustainability level, and all together in terms of institutional management. So this deals with the 3-4 major component in terms of dealing with the sustainable development. Now a very simple slide which I would like to share in the last related to the kind of, as we are know that we are facing a problem of the virus which are very all over the world we are facing. You see, I have gone through all the international organizations in terms of rapid loss of the basically forest, globalization effect, biodiversity loss, deforestation, mining activity, agribusiness expansion, wildlife trafficking, niche problem, climate variability. So what I'm trying to say is I have almost all the international organizations as concerned about the nature and the nature-based related problem to look for in altogether management. This is simply slide indicate about we have to look for different angle to different level of management of the solving the anthropogenic problem. Now in the last slide, which I would like to show to make more things. This is the basically Kullu Valley, where apple plantation earlier were very massive. Now this region is getting temperature more, and because of the increase in the temperature, plants started dying off, and yield is also very low. Now what is happening in due course of time, this valley once were planted with the apple, now people are shifting to the up part, and once shifting on the mountain in the terrace region, ultimately we have to cut the tree species for planting the apple. So now this different color indicate about the plantation of apple on the such a high terraces you see here. So basically cutting the tree of very bigger canopy, removal of the tree, and hardly planting a very lower canopy of apple plant is not going to fulfill or prevent the soil and the basically the soil erosion, nutrient erosion, and the landslide. And that ultimately is happening in terms of, one can find that happened in the Chamoli. This happened 5 years back in the Kullu Valley. Basically, a massive landslide has been taken place through the this avalanche, which is resulted into a flooding form which eroded all the vegetations and even the settlements. So what I'm trying to mention is we have to be very careful. Of course, we require a kind of development, but we have to be very, very careful in terms of solving the problem of the nature, looking the finding the solution in the local species, finding solution, the local people finding solution involvement to the local people. So this all I have shared my views, and thank you very much for giving me opportunity to share me. Thank you very much. Now, Prakash. Now it's over from my side.
हेलो सर, सुन पा रहे हैं? हेलो,
हाँ, यस,
सभी लोग हैं ना? थोड़ा सा एक मेरे ख्याल से फ्रैक्शन के लिए थोड़ा डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया था. हेलो
hello.
We can hear you.
हाँ, yes. Sir, yes, thanks for your kind message that you have given us, that we need to promote and broaden the understanding of environmental challenges in order to achieve the sustained growth. And you have also mentioned that we need to promote nature-based technologies to combat these environmental challenges. Now moving to the next segment, that I am profusely elated to take an opportunity to introduce the next guest speaker, Dr. Tejal Kanitkar. Dr. Tejal Kanitkar is an associate professor in the School of Natural Sciences and Engineering at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru. She has worked in the area of energy and climate change for the last 15 years. She has a BTech in Mechanical Engineering from Mumbai University, a Master's in Mechanical Engineering from University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and a PhD from the Department of Energy, Science and Engineering, IIT Bombay. Her work covers the broad areas of energy and emissions modeling, climate policy, and energy policy. Madam, we are eagerly looking forward to your kind message.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prakash, for inviting me to give this talk, and I thank CSIR NEERI for this opportunity. I have to take some anticipatory bail right at the beginning after Professor Singh's presentation. His was a very, very comprehensive overview of a lot of things that are very important. In contrast, I'm going to limit myself to a very specific message that I want to focus on. Let me also share my presentation. Yes. So I don't have a very long presentation either. It's a very short one. And like I said, I want to focus on some of the lessons from climate science on sustainability, touching on maybe a few things that have already been said by the two professors who spoke before me, the director of CSIR as well as Professor Singh. So let me begin by saying that we now know we have the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is IPCC, that's going to be coming out soon. We already have 5 reports that have been published. We have some special reports from which we have the most recent data. We have the special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming from the IPCC. We have the special report on land and food systems that was published only last year. So there is no dearth of literature on a broad range of issues on climate change. So it becomes very difficult to negotiate and navigate through all of that information that is there and to even present the entirety of the problem. I mean, I really congratulate Professor Singh in for his ability to have captured such a broad array of issues in such a short time. It becomes very difficult to grasp what the problem is. So I'm going to just reduce it to one simple lesson. And it is, I would warn all the listeners that some of these numbers, of course, come with their own uncertainties. When you are dealing with science, technology, there are uncertainties associated with it. These numbers are not sacrosanct. I mean, till the accuracy, till the 3 decimal point. That's not the point. A lot of these are results from climate models, simulations, the probabilities of what can happen, what cannot happen. So there is a large number of scenarios that are being constructed. Also because we are still learning as to what kinds of changes are happening in our biosphere, in our atmosphere, in our total ecosystem. The rapidly changing environmental situation, climate change is also going to lead to changes that we cannot necessarily forecast very easily. We have enough trouble also with short-term weather forecasts. And now here we are talking about really long-term climate models, speaking of what kind of monsoon variations we are going to be seeing 50 years from now, 60 years from now. That's very much into the future, and those kinds of forecasts, while very, very necessary, so that we can plan to address it right now, they become very difficult and they come with their uncertainties. That doesn't mean these estimates are not important. They're very important, especially for making policy regarding the future. They're very important, but they shouldn't be considered as number. I mean, the numbers are not important, but the overall message that those numbers provide is what is important. So we all know, and this was referred to earlier also, that as part of the Paris Agreement, where a lot of us now, regions that are part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, have agreed that climate change is happening. It is real, irrespective of what some people at the fringes might say, that it is not really happening. It is this conspiracy, that conspiracy. All of us know there is a scientific consensus that it is a real problem, and it is anthropogenic in its origin, meaning it is caused by humans. Changes that we have made, the process of industrialization over the last 200 years, while it has brought its benefits, it has also now confronted us with the problem of climate change. And this is slightly different. While connected, it is also different from the problem of pollution, which we have dealt with in the last 60 years or so. And I will talk about what is different in just a while. But broadly, what we know now is that climate change is happening. So we have limited carbon space. Globally, from around 1850, that is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, till about, for the foreseeable future, let's say 2100, etc., there is only so much carbon space. There's only so much carbon that the atmosphere can hold without leading to irreversible warming. What is the level of warming that we find acceptable? The political consensus on this is 2 degrees Celsius. You can't allow temperatures to rise above 2 degrees Celsius from what they were at the pre-industrial levels. However, there are small island states who say that even 2 degrees is too much for us. We will drown if the temperatures rise so much. It will lead to sea level rises of such levels that our islands will disappear. So in fact, we should have temperature rise should be limited to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, both these temperature targets are part of the Paris Agreement. They are part of what all of us as the countries in the world have committed to in terms of keeping temperature rise in check. So 1.5 degrees Celsius means a tighter budget, means we have less space to maneuver. So the total budget from historical to the future is 2,821 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now this includes all greenhouse gases. It's not just carbon dioxide, but all of this has been converted to carbon dioxide equivalent. So it includes methane, it includes nitrous oxides, etc., all the other greenhouse gases as well. Gigatons is 10 raised to 9 tons of carbon dioxide. So 2,821 for a 50% probability so 50-50 chance that we will not exceed a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius. For the 2 degrees Celsius target, we have slightly more space. We have more flexibility. We have more space to maneuver. We have 3,741 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Okay, then think of this as a parking lot. Right? If you have a smaller parking lot, okay, then you have lesser space to maneuver and keep your vehicles. If you have a larger parking lot, you have larger. So this is a small parking lot of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The larger parking lot is a 2 degrees Celsius. Now, if you look at what has already happened, 83%. So the past has already happened. Right? So from 1850 to 2017, 83% of this 2,821 gigatons is gone. That much space is no longer available. So many cars are already parked in the parking lot. Only 17% of the space in the parking lot is actually now remaining. If the parking lot, now this is a smaller parking lot, if the parking lot size was slightly bigger, of course we have a little more space, only 63% of it is occupied because the past emissions remain the same. What you have left for the future is 37%. But in both these cases, if you see, what it means is that a large part of the total global carbon space is exhausted. There isn't much space left for the future. If we occupy the space and continue occupying it more and more, start squeezing in more cars there, etc., at some point some cars are going to. And in the case of the atmosphere, what it means is it's going to lead to irreversible climate change in the sense that we'll have more than 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise for sure, more than 50% chance if we actually exceed this. If we exceed this also, we have more chance. And the problem is that a lot of what has already been exhausted has been exhausted not by us, not by developing countries. I'm just checking how much time I have. I think I have around 5 to 8 more minutes. So it has not been exhausted by the poorer countries. What is there, that carbon space has been exhausted by the richer countries, and this is a very small. If you take the 28 richest countries in the world today, this is the US, Western European nations, Australia, Canada, Japan, etc. All of them together, they contribute to around more than 50% of the world's GDP. They have around 13.5% of the world's population, and yet they have occupied more than 50% of the global carbon space. So what is then left for the future? Very little is left. I mean, the rest of the population, which is around 85% of the global population, has to now achieve levels of access to energy, amenities, better standards of living, well-being, reduction of poverty. All of that has to be done now with much lesser use of resources than was available to the richer countries. How do we do this? Do we know how to do this? Everybody speaks about a transition to renewable energy, to green technologies, and there is a whole host of discussion on how we can do this. India has very ambitious targets of meeting 100 gigawatts of our energy requirements, a total installed capacity for electricity generation just from solar alone by 2022. It's a very ambitious target. more ambitious than most developed countries, in fact, have put forward. So everybody talks about this, but this doesn't come without a cost. There is a cost even to this. So the sustainability constraint here and climate change provides perhaps concretely in some sense a much more stringent as well as a much more clear planetary boundary. Professor Singh spoke about boundaries and how we have exceeded those boundaries, and that planetary boundary and the sustainability constraint with respect to climate change is very clear. There is very, very limited carbon space that is left. And this is a cumulative constraint. I mean, all those at NEERI understand what this means in terms of flow and stock-based constraints. It's a total constraint. It's not, it doesn't matter how much you emit every year. If the total emissions actually exceed, even if I'm reducing my emissions, if my total cumulative emissions exceed a certain level, I will have still caused harm, right? So this is an issue. The other issue that I spoke about, that this is, while it is connected to pollution, it is also fundamentally very different from the problem of pollution, because the main problem here, the main culprit is carbon dioxide. While there are other greenhouse gases like methane and NOx emissions, etc., that are also highly responsible, but if you look at the overall contributions, as long as how long the gases stay in the atmosphere, etc., the biggest problem is carbon dioxide. Now, locally speaking, we have never considered carbon dioxide as a pollutant. In fact, if you have more efficient burning, more efficient combustion, you get carbon dioxide. If you have dirty burning, less efficient combustion, you get carbon monoxide. So getting carbon monoxide is bad locally, but getting carbon dioxide is not bad locally. But it is a problem globally speaking, because there's only a certain amount of atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide that we can deal with and we can address globally. So irrespective of what India does, we do 100 gigawatts of solar, 400 gigawatts of solar. If the US doesn't do anything, if Europe doesn't do anything, if the other countries, China doesn't do anything, if the other countries don't contribute to climate change mitigation, we will still face the impacts of climate change. So that's what I mean by it's not something that you can deal with locally. If you plant more trees, it's good. You should do it irrespective. But whether that will necessarily help you save the impacts of climate change? No, it will not, because it is a global problem and it requires a global solution. So globally, what we need is a rapid, what I call D&D, which is development as well as deployment of technologies that is required. But there are trade-offs, and the director spoke about interdisciplinarity right at the beginning, and it is very important to understand this, to understand the trade-offs. There are trade-offs. All technologies have them. Even solar does. Solar, while the costs of solar photovoltaics is reduced, whether you can integrate large amounts of solar technology without storage into the grid is a problem. So storage meaning battery storage, it comes with its own problems of pollution, its own problems of waste disposal. So one has to understand that there aren't any technological silver bullets, that we have solar, we have batteries, and we have electric vehicles, and we will basically deal with the problem. To be able to integrate these well with our existing technological systems, to have people shift over to newer technologies, as well as achieve our developmental goals. We still have a huge population that lives in poverty, that deals with drudgery, that deals with deprivation. So we have to address these problems. Can we do it with newer technologies? These problems are some things that we need to really focus on and understand. Just, the problems in the US are different. Let them deal with their own problems. Let them think about deployment. We have multiple challenges that our scientists and engineers and social scientists need to actually address. We have two extreme opinions very often. You have either technological silver bullets or a skepticism of science, saying that, none of this will work. All new technologies will create problems. So let's go back to forest. Let's go back to, everything green. Which is also a problem. You have older societies, primitive societies, which have low levels of life expectancy, which have high levels of infant mortality. All of these improvements in these indicators has been possible because of science, has been possible because of technological intervention. Women in science and technology, women in the public sphere today has been possible because of science and technology. So either extreme is a problem. We need to actually, on Science Day at least, I think affirm our commitment to looking for scientific solutions, and this includes both natural science as well as social science, scientific solutions to environmental problems that are not removed from our understanding of social and economic issues that we have to, as a developing nation, grapple with. And so we need to find strategies that benefit, that have the most benefit for the most vulnerable sections of our population. So I will end with that. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Just you have given us a very good message that madam, we need to explore more the links between climate and sustainable development. You also told that we need this global problem and we need global solutions for that. Though we are striving hard for it at the local levels. But your message is very relevant on this auspicious day. Thanks, man, for giving this important message. Now I have the pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker, Dr. S. Venkata Mohan. He belongs to our CSIR family. Dr. S. Venkata Mohan has done BTech Civil Engineering, MTech Environmental Engineering and PhD from Sri Venkateswara University, Tirupati. Dr. Mohan was visiting professor at Kyoto University, Alexander von Humboldt Fellow at Technical University of Munich, Germany, and Kyung Hee International Fellow, South Korea. Dr. Mohan research majorly intends to understand and respond to the human-induced environmental change in the framework of sustainability in the interface of environment and bioengineering. His main research interests are in the areas of advanced waste remediation, acidogenesis, microbial electrogenesis, photosynthesis, CO2 biosequestration, circular economy, self-regenerative systems, and biorefinery. He also undertook various projects associated with societal relevance and industrial consultancy projects in the area of environment. Dr. Mohan is recipient of the coveted Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize for the year 2014 in Engineering Sciences. He also received several awards and honors. Dr. Mohan is currently working as Senior Principal Scientist and Co-Chair in the area of Energy and Environmental Engineering at CSIR Indian Institute of Technology, Chemical Technology, CSIR IICT, Hyderabad. May I request Dr. S. Venkata Mohan to address the listeners, please.
Thank you, Prakash ji for nice introduction. I project my slides, please.
Yes.
So, are you able to see slides?
No, sir. Ji? No, not yet.
Now?
No.
Okay, again I will do it.
Sir, now? We are able to see, sir.
No.
Yes, sir, we are able. Yes, sir. We are able to see, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can see.
Thank you, Prakash ji, for nice introduction, and I would like to thank Director Neeri Rakesh ji for giving me this opportunity to share my view on something related to urban circularity with children. Very good afternoon to all. Today, after Director Neeri has stressed on the interdisciplinary, particularly related to integration of sustainable science and engineering, which is very critical and very important at the present status of great environmental challenges, to resolve that in a sustainable way. And what Professor Singh, he has very focusedly told that environmental issues, specifically telling the microbial diversity, particularly diversity, how it is going with respect to correlating with the planetary boundaries. And Dr. Tejal, she specifically noted that climate change is very critical and CO2 is not a pollutant. So keeping all this in mind, I try to put my views specifically telling that pollution is not a local issue, pollution is a global issue, as Dr. Tejal told. I would speak on urban context particularly, and why we have to go with circularity in order to make it regenerative and sustainable living. I will start with urban context, particularly why I have chosen urban is it represents most of the anthropogenic activities that will have global influence, but global environment influence. Basically, cities accounts for 2% of the total global area. However, it accounts for 80% of GDP. And also it accounts for about 75% of global material consumption as well as 70% of global emissions. Now we can see that urban systems, particularly the cities, are very complex and try to get all the material from exterior environment throughout the globe and concentrate it, use it, stock it and dispose it even though it has value. So these cities are becoming very concentrated with anthropogenic materials in landfills or some other places, which will have very significant influence on environmental context. Taking the material as well as stocking both have direct influence on the environmental sustainability. So just for an example, I try to segregate the different kinds of material that is coming into the urban context and with respect to its metabolism, what is happening with respect to the urban context. Basically, we can divide into technical, biological, water and fuel. Water and fuel I will not discuss, but it's internal part of both biological and technical. But technical material which relates to metal, plastic, glass and construction materials which will go into the urban ecosystem, used there and a little bit will be stocked, and reject material will come as a technical waste. Little bit will be recycled, reused and refurbished, but most of it goes to landfill even though it has value. So biological material, which is very important, particularly for regenerative resilient ecosystems, which we can say from agriculture, wood, fiber, dairy and livestock, after utility in urban ecosystem will come as a biological waste or emissions, which still have value in the form of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, CO2 as well as energy. After recycling little bit will go for landfills even though it has value. These two are very critical. Recently in 2019 there is report from FAO, food waste report, and it says that among the global emissions, food contributes 1/3 of food which is being produced from starting to harvesting to end of the waste, 1/3 is getting wasted. And the food agriculture activity starting from farming to ending into landfills, it contributes to 24% of global emissions. And in this 10% of emissions are related to food waste, and which is very important component in biogenic waste, which I have shown in this slide. Particularly, and again, when we compare, solid waste contributes to 5% of GHG.
Sir, your voice is not there.
Voice is not there?
Yeah.
So just now stopped or?
No, we can hear, sir. I think Dr. Prakash's connection, there's an issue. I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I can hear you. Yeah, it's very clear. Your voice is clear, sir. Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay. So can I continue from here? It's fine.
Yes.
Yeah. So according to report, as I told, that food waste contributes to 25%. Food waste contributes to 10% of global emissions, and 25% of GHG emissions are due to the food waste activities starting from agriculture. So I would like to stress that urban environment, particularly when we look into the metabolic context, it is very disordered. Metabolically, it is very disordered. Lot of resources is being wasted, and there is a disruptive material flow. A lot of open loops are there, and which will create a significant stress on environment. So this is a very significant issue. So recently there is one article published in Nature, December 2020 issue. They say that the anthropogenic mass in this sixth month of 2020 crossed the biomass in the global context, surpass the global living biomass. This is again a very significant issue. When we look into the statistics in starting of 20th century, the anthropogenic biomass, which represent metal, all the construction materials and everything anthropogenic arising from anthropogenic activities, that is only 3% of the global biomass. The global living biomass represent plants, which is 90%, apart from bacteria, fungi, archaea, protista, and animals. So now it crossed the living biomass and the global context. So this is very significant to be considered. And with the same way, if we continue, by 2040, this anthropogenic biomass will become triple compared to the dry biomass on the earth. So just for a comparison purpose, from same paper, they have given that the living biomass, particularly related to animal, which accounts for 4 gigatons, when it relates a human-made mass, particularly plastic, is about 8 gigatons at present. So almost double the quantity of animal biomass. Plastics, I'm very sorry, plastics of 8 gigatons is there. And compared to the trees and shrubs, about 800 gigatons, building materials is crossing 1000 gigatons. So this shows the significance, how the material is shifting towards non-living things, and which will have definite influence on biophysical phenomenon on Earth, and also create significant issues on planetary boundaries. So just to show this slide, we are a fossil-based economy, and we are dependent on fossils for our energy requirement or for our material requirement. Whatever right now we are using the materials, which is again coming from fossil-based reserves such as petroleum and fossils. So by after industrialization, that is particularly after 1950, the utility of fossils, particularly coal, oil, has increased exponentially. And with this rate, this material will not be available for future generation, that is after 2050, and also at present creating significant climate issues because of its emissions. So we have to understand that fossil resources are finite, and this exponential growth will not support the future generation because of increase of GDP and population. And we have to search for alternative means, alternative materials or alternative strategies to come up with the resource. So here I would like to come up with the linear model, particularly which we are practicing for almost 200 years. It's an industrial extractive model where take, make, and dispose approach, where after taking the material from Mother Earth and processing it and using it and then disposing it to landfills. This is not a sustainable practice, and this is creating significant influence on climate, environmental issues, as well as the depletion of reserves right now, which we are having, is also again an issue. So according to estimate in European Union, per capita of 15 tons is used with respect to the resource, but which is coming as 5 tons as a waste. And among the 5 tons, 60% is going to landfill, even though it has value. These are significant figures when we look into the global context, how much resources we are letting it, even though it has a value. So here, just to conclude, we have to change particularly, otherwise the future generation will have a significant issues with respect to their environmental thing. So just I try to put some of the figures in the global context with respect to domestic material consumption. As per 2010 figures, it's about 40 billion tons per year is the DMC, which accounts for 5 to 27 tons per person per year, which represent a linear model, take, make, and dispose model. By 2050, the population will increase to 10 billions from 7.8 billions at present, and India represents about 18% of the global population. So by 2050, with the same consumption and utility pattern, the DMC will rise to 90 to 180 billion tons per year. So accounting for 8 to 17 tons per person per year. This is a very significant figure. So we don't have resources, but the demand will increase. So if we continue to live like this and produce like today, by 2050, we will need 3 times more resources. We have a lot of stress on finite resources. We required 50% more fuel, and we also required 50% of more food, feed, and fiber, apart from 50% of more water. You're adding to this 70% of population in urban context. This is again a significant global issue. So this urban ecosystem will use the 75% of the natural resources. So concentratedly, they will be using 75% of natural resources, and they will be responsible for 70% of global carbon emissions apart from 50% of global waste production. So this is the very significant issue. That's why the SDG goals 12, responsible consumption and production, is coming into the existence. So to tackle these kind of issues, at present throughout the globe, there is a discussion about moving from linear to circular economy as a sustainable practice. So coming to the circular economy, which I would like to say is a cradle to cradle approach, a regenerative approach. The basic three pillars as proposed by Ellen MacArthur Foundation related to design out waste and pollution, keep production and material and use, as well as regenerative nature system. I would like to explain in this figure. Once we take the material from Mother Earth, the fossils, then it should be designed that the waste which is coming from the process will become a feedstock for second process. Like that, it should be circulated. The material should be circulated as much as possible so that waste will be reduced. The reject of waste will be reduced. And at the same time, we will not require much of the fossils. This is the basic concept of circular economy. The basic thing is we have to close the loops. We have to close the loops, the broken loops, whichever is available. And the third important principle, regenerative natural system, it basically relates to biogenic material, which is and biological process, and also support